everyone. I'm Robin Farmian. Quick raise of hands, how many people saw my session last year? Nice, that is amazing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about some of the examples, but a lot of new material. Now, what I've learned about hanging out with this community is that caregivers see medical problems long before a doctor sees them, right? The other interesting thing I've learned in the past year or so in this community is that you guys are my favorite audience. Like, everyone I meet here is genuine and kind and nice and helpful. And I just want to say a huge thank you for all of that. By the way, give yourselves a round of applause for that. Woohoo! So today I'm going to be talking about just a couple of things with the FDA and Medicare. And then I will dive into some of the technologies I talked about last year, just because it's a good refresher, since I mentioned anywhere from 25 to 50 companies during any of my keynotes. And then I'll wrap it up in the world of remote monitoring and some really cutting-edge innovations in the world of neuro monitoring. Now, before I dive into that, I know the people who saw me last year know my background. I'll just give it to the newbies very quickly. So I'm an early-stage entrepreneur, but the reason I went into healthcare is because I was misdiagnosed when I was 16 with ulcerative colitis. Ended up doing 43 hospitalizations, 6 major surgeries, and 3 organs removed for that misdiagnosis. Finally, when I was in my mid-20s, I became the patient as the CEO. I took full control of my own healthcare, ended up getting diagnosed correctly with Crohn's disease, put on Remicade, and within 24 hours of that very first dose, I went in full remission. Right? It quite literally happened overnight. So now that I've shocked those of you who have only seen me this time, let's dive into some of the really interesting things that are going on, shifting care into the home. And one thing I want you to remember is that caregivers, you are now part of the treatment pathway and the hospital pathway as well, right? You are one of the treatments. Now, Medicare just came out, and they have extended the hospital at home program now for 5 more years. Goes through 2030. Raise hands, how many people in the room have clients that have been hospitalized at home? Just a couple. That's very interesting. So there's about 400 hospital systems that have started their at-home hospitalizations. Over the next 3 years, I imagine that is going to rev up dramatically because of this particular move. Same thing with the FDA. They have been working to shift care into the home and really provide that home health care initiative. Now, previously, the FDA would think about the fact that everything takes place in a hospital or clinic. And of course, we know that is no longer the case. And so they're trying to make it a lot easier to get innovations to market, especially for patients in their homes. A good example of that is a company called Eli. Now, they are FDA registered. Raise your hands, has anyone heard of that category? Couple. Okay, you've probably heard of the categories FDA clearance and FDA approval. There's about 12 to 15 different categories and subcategories, but really that's what people think about when they think about clearing the FDA. FDA approvals take hundreds of millions, if not over $1 billion to do, and those are specifically for things like new medications. FDA clearance, especially when you're dealing with something called a 510K, these are for medical devices or software as a medical device. And it takes a lot less time. We're talking like a year and single-digit millions to get through the FDA in that term. Now, FDA registered is a whole new kind of thing to look at. This means that this company, they just sent their information to the FDA that they exist. They aren't doing clinical trials. The FDA is not looking into safety efficacy or efficacy with a predicate. They are just registered as if they exist. Now, this one is really cool because it is able to do cortisol testing in the home. It's a pretty big deal. So you buy them online. It's direct to consumer. You put it in your mouth and get a saliva sample. And just like a pregnancy test, within 20 minutes, it's going to give you your cortisol levels. Later on this year, they're coming out with both progesterone as well as testosterone. Let me tell you, if this had existed when I was coming off prednisone, raise your hands, how many people have had clients on prednisone or any of the steroids? Yeah, so I was on pretty high dose prednisone for quite a long time. So coming off of it, I had to go to the hospital blood lab every Monday morning at 8 a.m. for more than a year to go and get my cortisol levels done. This is the type of thing that completely eradicates that need. All right, so let's talk about a few of the startups and some of the really cool tech companies I talked about last year. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, that's Hive. What they're able to do is they can count the number of times someone coughs. It's a pretty big deal because coughing is one of the main drivers of urgent care and primary care. But none of us have ever sat down and tried to count how many times we cough. In fact, if someone is in a pretty severe COPD exacerbation, they can cough hundreds, if not over 1,000 times a day. Right next to that, that is 6 Degrees, and it is a bracelet that will control a computer or your smartphone. Fantastic for people who have upper limb mobility issues, whether it's from Parkinson's disease or a stroke. Lower left-hand corner, that's Sunrise. Now, I worked in sleep apnea for a couple of years, and one of the things that I felt so badly about our clinical trial participants is that they had to go and sleep in a clinic, right, not only to get the diagnosis of obstructive sleep apnea, but then to try out our device. I'm like, nobody sleeps in a sleep clinic very well. That is an absolutely ridiculous thing. So just the past few years, we've started to see these sleep tests going into the home. So the way this one works in particular is that the client just has an easy video call with a sleep physician. Then they send this little white sensor that you put on the end of the chin. It turns out we can do clinical grade sleep monitoring purely through mandibular jaw movements. Is that not the craziest thing to think about? Now in the middle, that's BrainCheck, one of 3 companies that I'm aware of that have taken the standard neurological exams, and they've gamified them and they've electronified them. And so instead of going to one of the, say, 15 to 18,000 neurologists in this country, this is now being done in the more than 500,000 primary care physicians. It can be done in the clinic, and it can be sent to someone at their home, especially if they're in a rural environment and they're not close to any type of health care. And on the right side, that's Sword Health. It's one of 2 of the giants that are bringing physical therapy into somebody's home. Raise hands, how many people have clients who take physical therapy? Quite a lot. Okay, raise your hands, how many have to leave the house to do their physical therapy? Yeah, okay, so this is really a big deal to not have to go into a physical therapist's office. Now you see the little avatar right next to the human being. That is teaching the individual how to do the exercises. And you see the little white dots on the gentleman? Well, that's where the smartphone is tracking exactly where his movements are, so that the AI avatar can correct the physical therapy in real time. All right, upper left-hand corner, Siren Care. Raise your hands, has anyone heard of Siren Care? Wow, okay, this is such a cool company. They are socks that measure the bottom of the foot, the temperature, right? Now, why this is important is because when you're dealing with diabetes, of course, if you get a hot spot on the bottom of the foot, there's a potential it breaks through the skin, causing a skin ulcer. And if that doesn't heal, it leads to the over 150,000 lower limb amputations every year in this country for diabetic foot ulcers. So these socks are a godsend. All you do is you put them on, and they are measuring the temperature in 6 very specific areas. And they can be thrown in the washer and dryer. But if there's a hot spot that's detected, the individual as well as the care team is alerted immediately to protect it before it breaks through the skin. On the right of that, that is the Perky app. There are 3 apps that have cleared the FDA for use with either the Apple Watch or the Garmin Watch. And what these are doing is they are tracking involuntary body movements and spasms for patients with Parkinson's disease, right? The hardest part about having Parkinson's, we can finally objectively measure. Lower left, that is AliveCore. It's an EKG monitor. Now, EKGs are, quite an old technology, but it's really the fact that we can now analyze the data behind the scenes. And so this one is AI generated, obviously. Now, what happens is all you do is you take your EKG for 30 seconds, and it can come back with a diagnosis of atrial fibrillation in less than a minute. In fact, I had a gentleman in one of my audiences a couple of years ago. He told me it took 3 months of going in and out of clinic visits and testing facilities to get diagnosed with AFib. He took my little device, and in under 60 seconds, it diagnosed him. In the middle, that's one of the many sensors that are wireless and connected, and they can sit on a patient's chest for anywhere from 5 days to, say, 2 weeks. This one in particular is called BioIntelliSense, but there's quite a few now on the market. This is the kind of tech that is fantastic for hospitalizations in the home. And so this one in particular is able to do continuous blood pressure, heart rate variability, and even pulse oximetry, just by having that sensor on the chest. And the one on the right, that's my living room. It's where I get the vast majority now of my own healthcare. Raise your hands, how many people have clients that are on IV medications? Okay, just a couple. So this is my Remicade. I shifted it into the home about 10 years ago. When I was getting it done at a hospital, it cost $28,000 just for the medication. Shifting it into the home, the company I use charges only $2,000. Over a 5-year period, that comes out to a difference in billing of over $1 million. My copay has dropped from $40,000 over that 5 years to under $5,000, right? That is $35,000 that I have in my bank account because I shifted my infusion into the home. Like, there we go. And my last 2 examples from last year, Together by Renee and Hibiscus Health. So these are really cool. All you do is you pick up your phone and you stare into the video camera for 30 to 60 seconds. And it can come back with blood pressure, heart rate variability, and pulse oximetry. Hibiscus Health takes it one step further, and they are able to do cholesterol and A1C using a smartphone camera. The reason they're able to do this now is because smartphone cameras have gotten so incredibly good, and computer vision technology has gotten really good. And so what you do is when you're staring at it, it is reading the blood flow under the face. Now, for most of these companies, I actually reach out to them and talk to the founders and the CEOs and get some extra information. I talked to Hibiscus Health a few days ago, and he's like, whoa, I would love to work with caregivers in the home. So either you can feel free to just look him up directly, or you can email me and I can put you in touch with them. All right, from random events to predictable patterns. This is a company called CarePredict. Now, I don't wear an Apple Watch because it's kind of clunky on me. I'm very, very small, so it's actually quite a pain on my wrist. And it's difficult to use a lot of the time, right? Having all the apps and being able to see them. That's why I like simple devices like CarePredict. It's very, very easy. There's one button to press, right? It's a 2-way talk radio. It can do keyless entry. But it's also tracking, right? Remote monitoring. And so it turns out they are able to predict a UTI almost 4 days in advance. It's actually really interesting. They found this in their own data. Turns out it's not frequency, it's the duration someone's in the bathroom. The reason is because if someone is old and is having problems moving around and they get to the bathroom, they're just gonna stay there until they can go, right? So it lengthens the duration. If someone is younger, like if they're in their 20s and they go and they can't go right away, they're gonna jump out of the bathroom, go do some things, and come back, which is why duration in the bathroom is the hard part. And SensiAI. So is the Sensi team in the room? Yeah? So raise your hands, how many people talk to Sensi in the expo? Nice, okay. So this is a really cool company. They have audio pods that they put into the kitchen, living room area, the bathroom, and the bedroom. They also track over 100 different things, including things like UTIs, and if someone is in increasing pain, purely because of the sounds that they're making. But the co-founder tells a really interesting story about this woman, Diana. And so Diana was in advanced dementia. And the caregiving team went to the family and said, we really think she should be having 24-hour care. And the family's like, no, 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 we just want to keep it during the day, arrive at 7 a.m. And Diana had had 3 falls in the recent past, all 3 resulting in a hospitalization. And so she's at home, and she suddenly started to wake up at 5 a.m. every morning. And she really had to go to the bathroom. So you can hear her calling out for help between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. And by the way, when this problem happened, that's when Sensi went into to the home and put down the audio pods. So they could hear Diana calling for help for an hour. Finally, at 6 a.m., she could not hold it any longer and just went in the bed. So an hour later, 7 a.m., the caregiver comes in. How happy do you think Diana was? Right? She would start yelling like, get out of here, I don't want to talk to you, I don't want you to see me, that kind of thing, because she's, of course, embarrassed and upset that she's been wet and uncomfortable for a very long period of time. Well, they went back to the family and they said, look, this is what's happening. She's waking up at 5 a.m., she really needs more hours. And so they added 2 hours to the morning and 1 hour at night. That means the caregiver was getting there right when Diana was waking up. Right? Her customer satisfaction scores went from 0 to 100% just by switching the hours. And PontoSense, raise your hands, how many people saw them in the expo this year? Nice. Okay, this is a very cool company. They are using radar to detect micro and macro movements. Now, macro movements, meaning someone is standing up, walking around, they've had a fall. Micro movements are those tiny little skin displacements you see when somebody's heart beats, right? Or they take a breath in. Now, they're doing this using radar. Radar is an over 100-year-old technology. And there's a few other companies in this space. The reason I like PontoSense is because they have 500 patents around the device and around the AI software. That is a huge number of patents. And so it turns out that the co-founder is the one who put an antenna on the BlackBerry. And he's responsible for having the BlackBerry be an actual phone. And so they looked at radar and they decided, hey, it's going to be all about where the radar goes and really, working with the antenna. And that's where they have a huge number of their patents. But of course, the thing is that there's a lot of data coming from all of these types of devices. And so the AI algorithms behind the scenes really make a difference. And so in the case of falls, they're actually looking at 25 different things to be able to categorize it as someone has fallen. It's a pretty interesting company. And delirium. And so I live about a mile away from Stanford University and Stanford Hospital, which means I have a social life with a lot of Stanford doctors and neuroscientists. And so some of these innovations are coming directly out of Stanford. Now, this one in particular is called Lucidify, and it was co-founded, and the CEO is Dr. Divya Chander. She is both an anesthesiologist, but she's also a neuroscientist. And she realized that delirium is extremely common and is frequently underdiagnosed. And this is a big deal because it is a major risk factor for dementia. And so what she's done is she's created an EEG device. It's very soft, it goes on the forehead, and she can do continuous monitoring as a predictive brain vital sign, catching delirium at the earliest stages when it can be absolutely treatable and even reversible, right? Because of course, if you don't, this is a big reason that people can slip into dementia. By the way, they're doing pilots, and if you want to get into one of their pilots, go ahead and email me and I can put you in touch with the company. Now, the US Surgeon General has come out and said, you know what, loneliness is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That is a pretty big deal. And so how people are dealing with loneliness varies across the care spectrum. This particular company is Companion IQ, and I'm on the advisory board, which means I get a very small number of stock options over a very long period of time. But this is Henrique, and he lives in the San Francisco Bay Area, and his grandmother lives in Europe, and he was really worried about her. Realized she was extremely lonely, but getting to go see her all the time is very difficult from California. And so he created an AI-based companion. And instead of having to have a new device or download an app, he's like, you know what, I'm going to meet patients where they are. They love to be able to talk on the phone, and they text message. And so that's his AI companion. It's not an app. It's all done through text messaging and by phone calls. And they even do these daily check-ins where the AI will call the client, and if she doesn't answer or text back in a very short period of time, then they alert the care team. Now, the more you talk to the AI, right, the better and more personalized it's going to get. So they've got, I think, 12 different characters right now, but they really learn about your client over time, just like if they were an actual friend. Now, one of the other cool things about this particular event, or this particular company, is that it will immediately push it to a human in the loop if there's any problems. And so if someone is looking like they're getting much more depressed or suicidal ideation or is going to harm something or someone, immediately it goes to a human in the loop so the human can go and look and see what's happening. And Jojo Health. So this is another company coming out of Stanford. And the co-founder is David Eagleman, who's a very famous neuroscientist with like a top 10 podcast, if you're interested in neuroscience. And so he realized it's not that people are only lonely. We've got to go in and start monitoring their neuro health. And so this is another company. They are doing pilots right now. I can easily introduce you to the company if you would like to talk about that. But you see, it's a tiny little robot. It's adorable. That's the companion. It has a motion sensor and microphone and speaker. No video or anything like that. But it's able to tell when grandma walks into the room, and so it will initiate conversations like an actual companion. But the big deal is that it is constantly analyzing it from a neurology point of view. And so if grandma starts saying, you know, the cat for table, and just like in nonsensical sentences, this is called a word salad. And it's an indication that someone is having a stroke. And as we know, with stroke care, minutes matter. And so Jojo, the robot, will say, repeat after me. And, you know, a fun sentence. And if the senior does get it wrong, she'll say, okay, well, I'm going to escalate this to the care team unless you cancel in the next 10 seconds, right? And so being able to get the care team to the individual right after she has a stroke when it's still treatable. And Moodfit. So we talked about behavioral, right, signals, physical signals, like vital signs and walking around. But what about emotional signals? Yeah, so this is a company that's been around about 10 years or so. And it's an app, and it does things like emotional check-ins. It can help reduce stress. It uses cognitive behavior therapy to help people reframe problems and things like that. Now, I met with the CEO right before coming to the event, and he told me a fun fact about the Super Bowl. Turns out they have so much population-level data now since they've been on the market for 10 years that it looks like when the losing city of the Super Bowl, for the first 48 hours, the city is depressed. The city. I know, right? And then after 2 days, it just goes back to baseline, back to normal. The winning team's city, actually the entire city gets happier for 2 days, and then it goes back to baseline. I was like, that is one of the most interesting things that I've seen coming out of population level data. And Total Life. So Total Life is virtual therapy. I always wondered why you would have to go to a therapist's office, right? You don't need your vital signs checked, you don't need a physical exam. Why am I wasting time going to a therapist when you can do therapy in the home? And so I like this particular company because they specialize in aging in place. And if any of your clients need to see or want to see a therapist, they can easily use a company like Total Life, and it's actually covered by Medicare. So falls aren't random. We know this, right? Hospitalizations do not just come out of nowhere. And cognitive decline is definitely very, very gradual until suddenly it's extremely obvious. So here are your takeaways, right? The home is no longer aftercare. It is now the center of care. Expect to start seeing more and more of your clients being hospitalized at home and getting IV medications in home. Secondly, patterns justify hours. Start using some of these types of remote monitoring and you can see a pattern happening. And that's when you can go back to the family and say, you know what? We need to adjust things. And we have a saying in healthcare, we say AI isn't going to replace doctors. It's doctors who use AI that are going to replace doctors who don't. Same thing in the caregiving space, right? Caregivers who use technology over the next 5 to 6 years are going to start to replace caregivers who don't use the technology. And lastly, in-home monitoring is absolutely a new revenue opportunity. And especially so if you think about the fact that if you're doing some type of technological monitoring, you can keep a senior happy and healthy in their home for a longer period of time. That means you are also taking care of them for a longer period of time. And so here's your action item, right? Choose a couple of tools. Do not have to choose the 20 or 31 of the tools that I mentioned today, right? Choose one or two. Get comfortable with it. Use the data coming from them to help justify care hours. And with that, I will say thank you.